Thank you very much. I'm sorry to be the timekeeper on this, or one of them, but it goes with the territory. So now I get to turn to this side of the room, and one of the organizers, when we were thinking about this, we thought, this would be a great sort of Shark Tank moment. and Faye, you can be Barbara Corcoran, and Jim, I think you have that sort of Mark Cuban look about you, and
I agree.
Yeah. All those billions. David, Kevin O'Leary. But I think that it's less Shark Tank and more Dancing with the Stars. What do you think? However, we will let you have your response moments. We've run a little over. We were going to give you 3 minutes. Maybe I could pair you to 2.5.
Yep.
Jim, as head of communications for the Kavli Foundation, what are your reactions? Have at it.
Yeah, thanks, Frank. And I'd just like to begin by singing praises to the project and to the research team. I found the project itself fascinating and well-reasoned. The topic dead on to the research agenda. And if we pay attention to what Alan Leshner was saying earlier in the day and actually create communication strategies based on fact instead of gut, this stands to be a real game changer.
Game changer?
Yeah, I
Why?
think so. Well, anytime you're developing a communication strategy that's actually thought out and developed around specific audiences, it's going to be helpful. And to me, this is the framework of this has all the elements for that, and to essentially also lay the groundwork for additional studies that can dig even deeper into some other elements. For instance, exploring how the communities in a district for a policymaker, what's the science that they're receiving at the same time that scientists are visiting the Hill? Looking at the influencers to policymakers. There's wide open doors to be looked at even further that this research is going to get into motion.
Faye, what do you think? They certainly defined their audience.
Well, first I want to say congratulations, because you won this competition, and that's terrific. And this is a very ambitious study that has challenges and opportunities. And so in my now 2.5 minutes, I want to summarize why I think it's so ambitious, what the challenges are, and why this is such a great opportunity. So it is ambitious, if all of you heard. In less than a year, they are going to be conducting surveys first of representatives from 250 science communication teams. Second, they're going to be doing 3 to 4 content analyses and case studies of when policy, the conditions under which policies make a difference. And third, they are going to conduct 20 to 30 qualitative interviews with members of Congress. So, a great, ambitious project. The challenges. First challenge is response rates. We all know in survey research, response rates are a problem. Responses from elites that you are interviewing is a special challenge. My recommendation from my own research with policymakers is what's going to be important is a letter of introduction from someone recognizable to your group of respondents that encourages them to participate because it's important. The second challenge is that you have 3 sequential studies in less than a year. So I encourage you to, my recommendation is to really be sure that you've got some of the same exact questions that you're looking at in each one. You plan that, but not to rush through, since you plan these sequentially, not to rush through so much that you don't have time for some analysis after each of those studies, and that you can plan for that for the next. Third challenge is We all run the risk in work like this of broad, sweeping conclusions we want to end up with. I encourage all of us, and I heard it this morning, to think about a contingency theory of science communication. Under what conditions, and with what kind of issues, and for whom can certain kind of science communication make a difference? And my third point, which is the opportunity you have, I think, is for that contingency theory of science communication to arise from the 3 sequential studies that you're going to be doing. I think it could be very exciting, and we at the National Science Foundation, who really want to contribute our research and communicate the great research that our PIs do to members of Congress, we really look forward to your results. Thank you.
I'm hearing some collaboration already with the advice. You went over 2.5, but your advice was so brilliant.
3 minutes, though.
That's what you get. All right, so you're in real trouble now because David's had a computer open the whole time. So.
My mobile teleprompter. I too want to lend my congratulations and my thanks to the research team. I think that this is a very timely and very important audience that you've chosen, very relevant to the situation today. And as a science communicator myself, I resonate with the fact that we work for a science-based enterprise, and I think also science communication should be an evidence-based enterprise. So I think the public demand and the public need for scientific information has never been more important in terms of sustaining the population, sustaining quality of life, and it's inherently policy relevant. And most of the funding comes from the American Congress to the research and development enterprise, and yet clearly, as we've heard in presentations today, we've seen an increasing polarization in attitudes and perception. So I think now is a really critical time to be hearing the lessons that you've learned. And so please put me at the top of your list. I noticed one of the things that you guys were going to do is have like a 3-hour short course afterwards to teach what you've learned. So I'm looking forward to hearing what you've learned. Just a few things though that you might also factor into your consideration is the perception that I've had, and just hearing the remarks from the Congress and reading their writings, is that they do value science, but they tend to selectively value that which aligns with their motivations and their agendas. And so the question is, as you're looking at strategies for conveying scientific evidence or scientific information, also be looking at those things that are going to, how well does their agenda color their ability to receive it, hear it, and understand it? If you're driving on the far right side of the road, everything looks like it's on your left, right? And so will they look at a piece of information from a nonpartisan source like the GAO or the Congressional Research Service and receive that as an unbiased or a valid source of information? I think too, keeping in mind that in a policy relevant arena, there are many ways of knowing that are in play. All policymakers are bringing sort of who they are culturally, they're bringing their values, they're bringing their faith-based ways of knowing, and so forth. And so just because a scientist or a science communicator enters the arena, you don't necessarily have a trump card that wins the day. And so how are these other ways of knowing factoring into the ways with which they're going to interact with the information? I think just understanding that, do they have a long-range agenda? I think too, interestingly, the words risk and risk perception, I didn't see showing up among your foci. I think understanding their values as an extension of that, do they perceive and understand the relative magnitudes of risk to things that they or their constituents care about? And does that therefore then factor into a willingness to consider information? And I think the last point that I wanted to make is just considering that policymakers' perceptions about themselves may be biased. I think if you asked any of them, they would say they have a high value for science. Many of them want to be able to check the box and say, I funded science. But quite often, if you probe or push them deeper, they would admit, I want to fund the good science, which aligns up with my motivations. That might be, say, weather science. I noticed that you construed space exploration, for example, as an uncontroversial topic, but might it be construed as controversial if space exploration came at the expense of Earth system science or Earth observation? And how would the American public feel if they were being presented with a trade-off that was hidden or wasn't brought out in the policy-relevant conversation? So these might be some things to also get at. But overall, I think the work that you're doing is really exciting, and I'm looking forward to benefiting, as I think we all are.
So before I go to questions from the group, any response to the feedback? As our PI, you want to, or questions that you have?
Wonderful, and I appreciate the comments and the enthusiasm. And I just realized this is probably not on.
There you go.
Okay, here we go. Okay, so thank you. So addressing FacePoint, we're aware of the difficulties of getting lawmakers to agree to interviews, and we're going to try. We will also be targeting staff members and drawing on our networks to reach out to those individuals. And we're also hoping to interview former members of Congress, and we think those individuals would likely probably be an easier get and maybe more candid. So that's
maybe.
Yes, probably more candid.
We'll see. Now, again, if you're watching via our webcast and you want to send a question in to our winners or our judges, please feel free to do that at #SacklerSciComm. Certainly, you can use. You can send an email question as well, sacklerwebcast@nes.edu. Here is one, and I'll start it this way and then move out into the audience. Chuck from the American Institute of Physics writes, why only review literature from the academic community and scientific organizations? Is there no literature already produced by members of the policymaking community on what means of communication has worked best for them?
So would you be willing to take
I'm
that,
happy
Erin?
to answer
Yeah,
that
Erin's been looking
question.
into this. Yeah.
So we don't mean to exclude any kinds of organizations working in any part of this space. And part of the literature review will survey that information. At the moment, I've included a lot of that literature under policy studies, and so it's often academics working with people from these organizations. I'm also attending, one benefit of having an international on your committee is that I can go to events in the UK, and so I'm attending a session at Westminster next week. The Parliamentary Office for Science and Technology have produced a report on how research is used within Westminster. So I'll be going along to that, and we're always looking out for any kind of literature that people out there think we should read. So I'm sure you'll be able to find my email address somewhere.
You can give it now if you'd like, or they can find you at the next coffee break.
Yeah.
Find it at the coffee break.
Yeah, right.
I thought we had a slide.
Questions from the floor. I see our mics. I'm looking for a hand. Down in the front here? And was there one in the back? I'm sorry. Oh, there's one in the back. It's hard for me to see in the back, so you're waving like you're at a game. That's great. And then we'll come down here. Go ahead.
Okay. Hi, my name is Melissa Harkleroad. Touching upon risk perception factors, are you also looking at, and I think it's important to, how these individual members of Congress perceive themselves as having the power and the agency and ability to produce change? So if they don't feel they can perhaps make a difference in the policy decision process, they're not necessarily maybe open or willing, or maybe they're open and willing to the evidence-based science communication, but I guess I'm still trying to think this out, but how are you incorporating, I think we shouldn't assume that they automatically have the power to make policy decisions, and that may influence whether or not they are participating in evidence-based science communication, and if you're able to incorporate that somehow.
So this is why we're here, to receive feedback like this. This is something, that we hadn't taken into account yet, and so I think we need to think about it a little bit more. But what I hear from your comment is that, for example, in the current Congress, it makes sense to pay more attention to what Republicans are up to as opposed to Democrats. They're in the majority and they have greater power to make policy. We'll take that into account, and I don't know if other members of the team have thoughts about that.
I think this really speaks to the need to think about a variety of sort of where people are in their stage of career, but also their seniority within Congress. So, making sure that we have a diversity of people that we're including in the interviews, both on the staff side and on the Congress side, is really important.
Any thoughts among you on this point?
Fine.
One of the things that we do, my team and I administer the Climate Resilience Toolkit, and we often work with, say, resource managers or municipal planners, and often the place in engagements that we're trying to help them find and use science-based tools to help them with the decision-making process. And we want to move them into a conversation not only about their values, the things that they value, the assets and so forth, but to begin to quantify in a traceable way, in a way they see how they got there, what is the risk to the things that they value, so that they can begin to answer the question, can we tolerate that risk or not? And then if not, we can begin to consider, well, then what actions are viable actions? What should we do about it? So there's a way, it's kind of a co-production of knowledge and a way to help them sort of metabolize together, but it also starts at a place where they feel comfortable, and it's a unifying point. It's recognizing that we all value that water reservoir, we all value this infrastructure, and so it kind of sidesteps the partisan divide and the polarizing nature of the topic. So I think that's a great framework to exploit.
Question down in front.
It says it's on now. Harkening back to some things that got said this morning about failure being a success, largely because failure creates the boundary around actually succeeding. I'd just encourage you, in whatever survey tools you use with any population of respondents, to ask directly, tell me about an opportunity where you were either talking to a policymaker or someone came in to try and talk to you about science and the whole thing just didn't work. What didn't work? What's your perception about why it doesn't work? I think you'd actually get more response from the science side if you go at them from the point of view of not asking them to tell you about their successes, because I think you're going to find a lot of people feel like the time they went to talk to a policymaker was a total failure. So they won't want to respond to you if it's framed as, tell me what worked for you.
So thanks very much for that. I mean, we had actually been planning on asking exactly that question to our members of Congress and their staff, both from their perspective, what works and what doesn't. But we actually hadn't talked yet about including that sort of question, focusing on perceived failures among the scientists we survey. So that's great. We'll incorporate that. Thank you.
Before we conclude here, just one question. Maybe I missed this, but how will you select the members of Congress that you're going to speak to? And do you wait if a member of Congress has a national lab in his or her district versus?
So we're seeking partisan balance. We're thinking about differences in seniority. We're focusing not entirely, but people who are involved in making legislation that's more tied to the physical and natural sciences. We have some other criteria. We haven't fully worked it out. These are going to be happening in the spring, but we're interested in interviewing some people who we know to be science advocates, and we're also interested in interviewing people who may express some reservations about the scientific community. So we want to get a real mix as best we can.
Onto something, Jim? You think they're onto something?
That's good.
That's great. Well, we're going to move right to the next panel, but before we do, and as we do, would you join me in congratulating our team here, wishing them huge amounts of good luck on the enterprise. And I think we'd all, it's not the right way to do survey research, but we would all like to drop in on those conversations you're having with members of Congress. So thank you all very much.